Andor Episode 12 gave us a terrifying post-credit scene of the Death Star under construction, and based on what we know from Rogue One, it's going to be at least another couple more years before the battle station is fully operational. But just where exactly is the Death Star? Specifically, where is the Death Star currently located? Keep in mind that at this point, the Death Star is still a secret project outside the knowledge of the general public, so the Empire is definitely keeping the Death Star's construction restricted to a few secret locations, meaning at this point in time, it can't exactly be moved around easily, especially since it's not fully operational. Which is why the question of its exact location is such an interesting question to consider, as depending on its location, it may have a huge impact on Cassian's story and Season 2 of Andor moving forward. So where exactly is the Death Star? Well, when we take a look at the background of the post-credits scene, we can actually see a distinctively blue world in the background, the name of which wasn't given by the show, which is still our first clue as to where it could be. Most fans probably noticed the pieces of equipment used by the spider droids are the very same pieces constructed by Cassian and the other prisoners, linking the creation of the Death Star to the titular character himself, demonstrative of the Empire's use of slaves and forced labor to construct the world-killing machine. So really, it might also indicate that the Death Star has now been moved to Narkina 5. Which is where the Empire probably picked up quantities of the equipment the prisoners were making and is now installing it to the battle station. On top of that, it also has the same distinct blue hues that are characteristics of the prison moon, and it would also be easy to hide the presence of the battle station in that particular system. After all, the prisoners were kept locked up in the various prisons without a chance to look up at the sky, so really they wouldn't be able to take note of the battle station's existence, keeping the Death Star well away from any prying eyes. So logically, it would make a lot of sense if the planet we see behind the Death Star is Narkina 5. While on first glance it might seem like the most obvious answer to the question, I actually think that the show might be trying to trick us out here. You see, in the shots that we see Narkina 5, the ocean moon is sitting in front of another massive brownish planet, but that same brownish planet doesn't seem to appear anywhere in the post-credit scene. Now, you could attribute this to the perspective in which the Death Star was shot, which might obscure the brown planet in the background, but I actually don't think this is the case. What's more likely is that the showrunners were trying to trick us into thinking that this is Narkina 5. After all, we are already familiar with its appearance in the show. While Narkina 5 might be the most obvious answer, it isn't the only one. In fact, there are plenty of planets and moons out there in the Star Wars galaxy that could very well look the same. Not to mention, Narkina 5 is hardly an extremely secure system. The fact that random aliens on quad jumpers can enter and exit the system without much hassle sounds to me like a major security risk. The fact that the hyperspace lanes haven't been guarded nor a fleet orbiting the system means that literally everyone with the right calculations could come and go. Not to mention, the amount of transports flying in and out of Narkina 5 must be pretty frequent, with transports shipping in new prisoners to keep production lines consistent. So really, all it would take is for one prisoner to look out the window and see the massive floating battle station to realize what the Empire was up to. It just seems like a pretty dumb move from the Empire's part to move their battle station there once you take everything else into consideration. So what other possibilities are there? Where else could the Death Star be located? The strongest possibility is that the Death Star is currently orbiting Scarif, the planet which housed the data on secret Imperial projects. And this is certainly a very strong possibility, as the planet did also have the same bluish hues due to it being mostly oceans set in a sort of tropical climate. And if you zoom in on certain parts of the post-credit scene, you can sort of make out certain land masses with beaches very much aligned with what we saw in Rogue One. And it wouldn't be a very bad location as well, as the Scarif system would likely be very well guarded and protected, especially since it was already host to a secret Imperial facility. I mean, after all, it also housed the Death Star plans. In fact, the reason why the Empire chose this particular planet as the safe for the Empire's most classified projects is also due to its location in the Outer Rim, away from the prying eyes of the Galactic Senate. In fact, Scarif is also the location of an Imperial think tank division known as the Tarkin Initiative, a division which was hugely responsible for the creation of the first and second Death Star. In fact, director Orson Krennic was also appointed as the leader of that division, despite his rivalry with Tarkin. The planet is also noted to have dense metals which were incredibly valuable for starship construction, but given that the planet was located in the Outer Rim, it proved far too costly to ship supplies all the way to the core worlds. But what it could do is be the site for the construction of the Death Star, allowing the Empire to access an abundance of raw metals to supply the construction of the Death Star without having to risk creating extensive supply chains that could very well be exposed to the public. In fact, we do know that at some point the battle station was moved from Geonosis to Scarif for the final stages of construction. And given from what we saw in the post-credit scene, it's pretty clear that the Death Star is in its final stages. So it would simply make a whole lot of sense that the planet the Death Star is currently orbiting is Scarif. But there are a few missing details that led me to question this conclusion. For one, what's super iconic to Scarif, at least when you view it from space, is the floating space station that provided the planetary deflector shield, the very same one the rebels were trying so hard to destroy in order to receive the Death Star plans. Known as the Golan M3185, the space station also acted as a sort of gate, a single point of entry and exit for all ships, something which we don't really see here. We are also missing the garrisoned Imperial fleet that orbited the planet as well. Granted, because of the way it was shot, the Death Star could very well be obscuring all these different details. So despite a few missing details here and there, I'm willing to admit that it's more than likely that the Death Star is located on Scarif, as that would make a whole lot more sense. If this planet is indeed Scarif, then moving on to Season 2, we could very well see guys like Krennic, Galen Erso, and Tarkin make a return to live action. And it does seem like the show will be heading towards this direction in the future. In fact, the producer Tony Gilroy has mentioned that Season 2 will be quite different from what we got in Season 1. And that the show will ultimately lead into Rogue One, sort of how Rogue One led straight into A New Hope. So what this means is that at some point in Andor Season 2, Cassian will eventually catch a whiff of this secret Imperial project and begin to investigate as to what it is. Now, Cassian probably won't encounter the Death Star in person, at least not until Rogue One, but he could very well bump shoulders with guys like Krennic, Galen, and Tarkin. Or at the very least, the show might give us a few isolated scenes with these guys. Also, keep in mind that we do know for an uncertain amount of time both Galen and Krennic were situated on Coruscant, which has already been heavily featured in Season 1. And we might actually have a clue of this, as by the time of Rogue One, the Rebel Alliance and Cassian in particular was already familiar with the existence and work of Galen Erso, part of why they decided to find Jyn Erso in the first place. So it really looks like we are starting to see the beginnings of everything falling into place, and it really looks like we may even revisit Scarif in Season 2. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.